only going to get better. Like, our evidence is only going to get better as we go through, as people come forward.
And I would have been heartbroken if I had to turn around to her and say, I can't broadcast that interview because the lawyers won't let me.
He could have really blown up that we were giving his daughter a voice to express her opinion about this.
He looked furious. It was almost like he knew this day was coming.
The classic thing of not denying the black and white allegation, did he murder, and actually picking up and denying and having a go about all these other peripheral matters.
Welcome to the 9th update episode of Dear Rachelle, your behind-the-scenes access to this live podcast investigation series. I'm your host, Ashlea Hansen. Investigative journalism can uncover extraordinary stories, but it also involves a huge amount of commitment and work before you even push the record button. From deep dives into thousands of documents and interviews with former cops, witnesses and experts, to the extensive research our team carries out in the background, there's a lot you don't hear in the final edit. But beyond journalism, there's another layer that's just as critical, the legal one. Investigating Rachelle's case in real time brings major legal challenges, especially when it comes to serious allegations and key evidence that comes to light in a cold case investigation like Dear Rachelle. For the first time, we're lifting the lid on that side of things. Joining me is Justin Quill, media and litigation lawyer and partner at major law firm Thomson Geer. Justin and his team have been advising us, guiding us through complex legal territory as we've navigated Rachelle's case. Justin, welcome.
Great to be here, Ash.
Firstly, tell me, what does a media litigation lawyer do? How do you spend your days?
I guess I'd describe myself as a content lawyer. I'm really about the content. I'm not doing agreements and deals between companies. I'm talking to editors and journalists about what we can put in newspapers or on TV or in podcasts. And then if something goes wrong, someone sues or there's a contempt of court issue, then I'm defending us about that content. So everything is content for me. I'm trying to get content published. And then if there's any issues with that content that's published, then I'm trying to mop up those issues and go to court and try and defend us.
Why do unsolved cases like Rachelle's require careful legal consideration in the oversight before publishing?
There's a whole stack of reasons why there's legal oversight. One of the main ones is defamation, of course, because when we're looking at a cold case, as was the case here, you start to zero in on people and you start to suspect that this suspect is perhaps the person who may well have done it, and that's defamatory. And so you've got to be careful that we make sure we've got defences. We've seen podcasts in the past where people have zeroed in on a particular person, and it turns out, yes, they did do it. Well, that's all fine, but what if they didn't? And we've got to be alive to that possibility and making sure that we can defend whatever we publish in a podcast in court if someone decides to sue us. There's other things as well. There might be victims of sexual offence issues. You can't identify victims of sexual offences. There could be family court stuff. If there's intervention orders that involve kids, or there's a bust up and there's a custody dispute, we've got to be alive to that. It could be contempt of court issues as well. So there's all sorts of issues, legal issues. I have in my mind when I'm reading a story or listening to a podcast, I've got like probably dozens of things that I'm sort of going through in my mind. Yep, that's fine. Oh, I better think about this one. How am I going to deal with that? That's fine. Oh, what about this other issue? So there's dozens, but probably the big ones: defamation, contempt of court, and then all the other things like victims of sexual offence identification, things like that.
And can you tell us more about your experience in defamation and defending publishers like News Corp? And I know you've defended Channel 10 as well on some really high-profile cases.
I started in 1997. After a little while, I sort of moved up the ranks and ended up taking over the practice, and we've then built this practice. Now, I think it's fair to say we've probably got the biggest practice in the country, or not probably, we do. And we do act for all of Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 10. Then we've got News Corp, of course, from Fairfax. And so we've defended them, everything from, say, the Bruce Lerman case for Channel 10. We've done plenty of fairly high-profile ones for News Corp. News Corp was literally, I think, my first day in the office in 1997. I think the first file I got was a News Corp file. So I've been acting for News Corp for literally decades. So back then, it was more heavily skewed to defamation. You know, defamation was a bigger issue, especially in Sydney. It was a bigger issue than it perhaps is now. There's less defamation now. The laws have changed slightly. I think they're still too plaintiff-friendly, but they are not quite as plaintiff-friendly as they were perhaps 10 years ago.
What is the message that gets sent to the public when plaintiffs fail in their bid to sue?
Look, I can't tell you what you would have to say about me on the front page of a newspaper to make me want to sue. I think it is just such a bad idea to sue. Now, you look at Ben Roberts-Smith, Bruce Lerman, like they're probably the poster boys for why you would not sue. You also have Hollywood celebrities who take something nasty said about them and turn it into something massive. A little bit like the Barbara Streisand effect. Like it's a bad idea generally. And what you never get, you never make money out of defamation if you're a plaintiff. People see these big payouts. Oh, so-and-so got $300,000 or $400,000. What most plaintiffs don't even realise is that they might have to spend $1 million on a case, and if they win it, they get their costs back, but that's only usually 60 or 70%. So they're out of pocket $300,000 or $400,000. That might be paid for by the $300,000 or $400,000 damages award. So basically they get back to zero and they make no money out of it. And they're risking, if they lose, spending $1 million and having to pay the publisher, let's say $600,000. So they're risking $1.6 million to win zero. And I often say to people who come and ask me, should I sue so-and-so? Or I say, take your money, go down to the casino and put it all on red or black, and you'd be much better off. Cases like Lerman and Ben Roberts-Smith tell people that it's a bad idea to sue.
In terms of our case and our investigation into the unsolved murder of Rachelle Childs, there were multiple persons of interest and there was a suspect, Kevin Steven Correll. How did you analyse that risk before we published?
You came to me right at the start, before you sat in front of a microphone. You came to me and said, look, here's what we've got so far on this case. And before we even talk about someone being a suspect, we need to be able to know that we're going to be able to prove that they were a suspect, that there are reasonable grounds to suspect they're guilty of this crime. So firstly, I'm looking at, okay, where are the risks are going to be? Is there a contempt of court? Is there a victim of sexual offence type risk in this, or is it all defamation? And if it's all defamation, then who is the person who we are most at risk to? Who are we most likely to be defaming? It might be we're defaming a few people. And then I'm thinking, okay, well, how do we defend that? And the most important way to defend something is to be really careful and cautious about the imputations or the meanings you convey in what you broadcast. So to be really simple about that, rather than saying someone is guilty of a crime, we only want to say they're a suspect, that there are reasonable grounds for suspecting that they may have committed a crime. So once we sort of set some ground rules like that, then I'm looking at, okay, what evidence have we got to prove that there are reasonable grounds for suspecting? What are those reasonable grounds?
What do you think the risk was of Kevin Correll leaving the imputation that he was suspected of murdering Rachelle Childs, and what gave you comfort to believe that that was fair and accurate reporting?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So by the time we got to do the first podcast, I was pretty relaxed about our ability to prove at the very least that there were reasonable grounds for suspecting he did it. And I was very comfortable about that. Now, on what basis? Well, there's a whole stack of things. I mean, we'd almost have to go through the whole podcast series to do that. But some of the big ones was the phone data, increases in technology that allowed us to say what he said about his whereabouts probably wasn't correct. Some of the evidence about the way he turned up the day after the murder, his conduct. A big one, of course, was when his daughter, Jazz, came forward and what she said about this, the bikie story, where he said to her, I've never said that it was done by bikies. And Jazz said she knew that he had said that. He'd said that to her. So, that's just, I've just off the top of my head just named a couple of the key things. There's a whole stack of things. And I think, as I said to you before we got into episode 1, I remember saying, we're only going to get better. Like, our evidence is only going to get better as we go through, as people come forward. Jazz is a perfect example. The phone data expert coming forward as well. We've got a set amount of evidence as we go into episode 1, and it's not like that evidence is just suddenly going to disappear. Sure, it's possible that some of it might get undermined a little bit, but generally speaking, the evidence you've got remains, and then all you do as you go along, you usually find that you're going to build on that evidence, whether it be in relation to Kevin or it might have been someone else. It might have been as we rolled along through it. Well, there were reasonable grounds for suspecting Kevin wasn't the person, but that doesn't mean that Joe Smith over here, that evidence doesn't come out and all of a sudden our podcast might have taken a very different turn towards them. So I was sort of mindful of all of that. And then I guess I'd overlay this really important point. And I don't want to unnecessarily pump you up here, Ash, but it was all your hard work. Like when you came to me and I said, yeah, sure, I'll look at what you've got and give you an advice. And I thought that won't take me too long. And then you've given me an absolute plethora of material and I could see how hard you'd worked on it. And, court transcripts, all this historic data, people you'd interviewed. And it was really the thing that gave me a lot of comfort was the hard work that had gone into it. And there's no, as is always the case, there's no substitute for hard work and getting, your approach was very open-minded at the start. There's a whole stack of people it could be. We're investigating this cold case and I don't know who it is, but I'm going to do the work in order to try and expose either who it is or just at least expose some of the data so that people can, form their own opinions. But it was the hard work and that open attitude that should be the case for investigative journalism that gave me a lot of comfort.
Oh, thank you for those compliments. It has been a big investigation and a team effort to get to this point. When you're working on these stories behind the scenes, your end, how many people are assisting you in your analysis and advice?
We've got a very big team here. There's a dozen people in the Thomson Geer media team. But on something like this, you really have to get into the detail of it. You've got to understand how this fact impacts this fact and then explains this fact. And so you can't really have a whole stack of people working on it. It's just going to cost too much if everyone's going to be across all of the details. So, for example, this podcast was really just me and Samantha McGeck. Samantha's a senior associate who's worked with our team for, more than 10 years. Samantha was across every single detail. And of course, we're looking at all your draft scripts. We're looking at the evidence. We're looking at the interviews. We're looking at emails that were going out to ask people for their response to things. We're looking at the front pages. And so Samantha's across every single detail and then bringing to me and really doing the legwork and the hard work and bringing to me, look, hey, I think this is a real issue. You've got to get right across the detail of this and making sure, literally collaring me and saying, read this, you need to be across the detail, just ensuring that you have two brains bouncing ideas off each other. I need to, otherwise I could get myself in a bit of an echo chamber. I need to be able to say, hey, Sam, what do you think about this? Or have her say, hey, Quilly, what do you think about this? And that's really important. Also, two people reading it so that you're not missing details and you're not missing things. Sam was I'm sitting up here talking about my thoughts here, my thoughts there. There wouldn't have been one thought that I had on this podcast that didn't involve discussion with Sam, not one. So it was definitely a team effort, just a small team on the legal side as part of the much wider team working on it.
Yes, she was a superstar. Just on Kevin Correll, before publishing, what was the level of risk to publish so much material in relation to him and allegations against him?
Yeah, I mean, look, I was reasonably comfortable with the level of risk because you'd done all the work and it was an investigative journalist piece. There's defences in the Act, in the Defamation Act, that say if you're doing this sort of public interest journalism, investigative journalism, and you're balanced, which we were, we made sure we conveyed not an imputation of guilt, but one of only reasonable grounds for suspicion. I was reasonably comfortable with the risk level, but our risk level usually lowers as we go forward. And the reason I say that is because the evidence we've got remains. But as you're doing the podcast, more and more people are coming forward and more evidence is coming out of the woodwork. And so you're adding to the evidence you've got. So wherever your risk level is on day one, usually in relation to a certain person, you're usually going to be less as you go forward because you're going to get more evidence. There's no better resource for police or investigative journalists than the public. And this is why for cold cases or crimes generally, the police often put out rewards. It's to try and entice the public to assist them. And having literally thousands of people thinking about these sorts of things and perhaps remembering things that they'd forgotten at the time and giving information, that's the best resource. As good as one investigative journalist can be, they're never going to trump 10,000 potential witnesses out there all providing their assistance. So that's why I felt like the risk level is probably going to improve as we went forward rather than go the other way.
I remember our first conversation though, and I was really nervous about being able to publish the interview I'd done with Jane, who had accused Kevin of rape in 1980. And he was tried under his previous name, Kevin Cornwall, and was acquitted. Now, I remember sharing with you my concerns about that interview because she gave me her time. She trusted me with her interview. And I would have been heartbroken if I had to turn around to her and say, I can't broadcast that interview because the lawyers won't let me. Can you take us back to that conversation?
The lawyers are always painted as the bad guys in these scenarios, aren't we? But one other thing to why I was comfortable in investigative journalism is trust, is building trust with the subjects of your interviews, potential witnesses. Witnesses are everything in every case. So in terms of the rape cases and the rape allegations, I actually felt like those cases assisted us in relation to Kevin. I think we were closer to conveying in relation to him guilt in the part of those rape cases. And if you take the case where he was, pardon the phrase, but literally caught with his pants down, he was in the car with the victim. The police turn up. She jumps out of the car. She's half dressed and she runs to the police and says, this has just happened. The police walk up and there he is, literally doing himself up, and he gets taken down to the police station. He pretty much admits it. But his excuse effectively was, well, she asked for it. Now, even as I say that now, it's hard to even imagine in 2025 someone saying that and someone getting away with it. But they were the bad old days, I'm happy to say well before my time, the 1970s, 80s, maybe even the early 90s, victims were almost the defendants in rape trials, and evidence led, and they were cross-examined on their sexual history. Now, that's not allowed today, nor should it be. But so, she was asking for it type of attitude would not fly in 2025. So I actually felt like, okay, if he sues us, we're going to be able to prove the truth that he raped this woman, and perhaps that the others as well. But at least in relation to that one, I felt like we're going to be able to prove the truth of it. And so what we had then, and again, this is quite a technical point, but this is sort of the analysis that I was going through. What we have is weighing up just an allegation of reasonable suspicion of murder versus actual rape, guilty of rape. Now, I think murder might be considered in the eyes of the law more serious than rape, but an allegation of murder, a reasonable suspicion of murder, is not more serious, in my view, than an actual guilty finding of rape. So I thought, like, if he sues us and says, well, you conveyed that I'm a suspect and I wasn't, we turn around and say, well, we also said you were a rapist and you were. So I actually felt like the rapes assisted us in lowering risk in relation to Kevin. That's a discrete and very specific bit of legal analysis that I conducted there, and it's perhaps slightly counterintuitive. You might have thought that I was going to say, oh, we can't talk about him being a potential rapist. That's going to make it riskier. I actually felt it went the other way.
Yeah, that did surprise me because you said to me, go and find more victims, and there were more victims out there. And some of them did agree to speak on the record as well, which was, like you say, it still blows my mind that some of them spoke on the record, and all because they were motivated by the fact that it could help in getting justice for Rachelle. Certainly the case against Kevin Correll is very much a circumstantial case. Many investigators would describe it as a strong circumstantial case, but there was never a charge. So they did fall short on finding enough evidence to be able to charge him with murder. Let's talk about the phone ping data and how that changed the case. My colleague Patrick Carline found Dr. Matthew Sorrell at the Mushroom Cook trial in Melbourne and reached out to him and asked him if he'd analyse Rachelle's mobile phone data from her case, and he agreed. From your perspective, when that came through, that analysis, and he was so definitive that it was impossible for Kevin Correll to have made that 608 phone call from the Campbelltown area where he says he was, what did you take away from that interview?
Yeah, I thought that evidence was really important because unlike the evidence about, for example, he turned up the next day after the murder and he looked really terrible. He looked like he'd had a big night or a late night or something like that. That's very subjective evidence. Phone ping data is very objective evidence. It's impossible for him to argue, he being Kevin, for him to argue with it. And it really does demonstrate advances in technology from the time of the initial investigation and coroner's inquiry to the time of your investigation that allowed this data to come out. And so it not only calls into question his alibi and completely undermines it, it separately puts him in around about the vicinity or the area that we think Rachelle was, and so puts him, rather than the alibi taking him out of the frame, this puts him right in the frame. And the other thing then it does is, one of my concerns the entire way through, and I know in your question you noted that he was never charged. True, that is. Worse than that in some respects, there was an open finding at the coroner's inquest. Now, that was something that was in the back of my mind the whole way through. Now, this evidence, of course, about the phone ping data wasn't available to the coroner at the time. And so not only does it undermine his alibi and put him more in the frame by putting him in the approximate area, but it also then allows you to explain away why perhaps that open finding occurred, and it made you wonder would in 2025, with this phone data evidence being available and his alibi undermined, would a coroner still make an open finding? And I would have thought no, but so that's why I thought it was really important. Fantastic work by Patrick. It's exactly what we're talking about. This whole case was about. It was about investigative journalism, and that was just an example of investigative journalism at its best.
Dear Rachelle is a multimedia investigation. So fundamentally, there's a podcast, but there's also printed articles in News Corp papers that go out nationally, online stories, videos, and social media content. How do you analyse the risk for each publication?
The law is the same, whether it be a front page of a newspaper versus a podcast or even the 6 p.m. news. But there are, of course, different dynamics. In a podcast, you might have people going into more detail than you will in the front page newspaper article. You also have perhaps more music and pregnant pauses and all sorts of things that can create drama and arguably give a different meaning. So you've got to think always about the meaning that's being conveyed. I might say it's an interesting dynamic as well when you're dealing with someone else, like the newspaper editors then come in and they might not necessarily know the story quite as well as you do, Ash, which is not surprising. And so, they're critically analysing, how is it that we can say this, or why are we doing that? And so you're then explaining the advice to the newspaper editor. Then they've got their own interests. You're running the story, you're illegally in the copy, but you've got to think also about headlines and things like that. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on there, a whole lot of dynamics. Look, at the end of the day, I've got to weigh up all of these factors, and there's dozens, maybe hundreds of different factors that go into it to make sure that my advice allows you guys, the journalists, to produce content that is commercially valuable and viable, but that isn't too risky. And so it's, really about balancing those things, risk versus reward, and making sure we hit the right balance.
Just on front pages, and we had a few, you took particular interest in the Jazz front page where she was openly accusing her father, Kevin Correll, of murder. Let's talk about that front page and the work that went into it from your side of things.
Yeah, I remember I'm from Warrnambool originally. I was driving home from Warrnambool when the front page came in. So I was in the car looking at the headlines. We'd done the copy, but I was looking at the headlines and discussing it with Ben English, the editor of the Tally. Defamation's very different to most causes of action. If there's a dispute, a contract dispute between two companies, it's very black letter. You agreed to do this and you didn't do it. There you go. And you have an argument about it and you go off to court. Defamation is very emotional. It's an emotional tool. When people are accused of things on a podcast or in a podcast or on a front page of a newspaper, they react emotionally. And so I was mindful that this wasn't just an allegation being levelled at Kevin by you, Ash, or by one of his former colleagues at the car yard. This was his daughter, and I was very mindful of how that might impact his decision making. And of course, could go two ways. He could have really blown up that we were giving his daughter a voice to express her opinion about this, or it could have been the opposite. It might have made him sort of think about his actions. That's a hard thing to judge, but I was very, very mindful of the emotion of that front page and the impact on him. Normally I'm thinking about the reasonable reader because that's what the law talks about. But in that case, I was also very mindful of not just the reasonable reader, but Kevin as well.
What gave you comfort to approve, from your side of things, the publishing of Jazz's story and to put it on the front page?
There are probably a few things, right? Number one, just all the evidence that we had generally, quite apart from Jazz. Number two, this was her opinion. And that's what she was doing. She was expressing her opinion. And then number three was something specifically about what she was saying, and that was he denied to her that he'd made up this story about bikies having been the ones that cut off Rachelle's finger. And Jazz knew that he had told her that. So he told her that years earlier and then denied it later. That was the moment that she felt, in her opinion, she felt that he had done it. And that was very specific evidence. And I thought it was great evidence. And it was evidence that was going to be hard for him to deny or counter. So I guess it were those three things, the general evidence we had in the case, her really just saying, this is my feeling, this is my opinion. And then it was that specific evidence that she brought to the table about the allegation that, or his denial that he had made the allegation about the bikies cutting off her finger.
You mentioned emotion before, and so many families have estranged relationships, and it's not entirely uncommon for a father and a daughter to be estranged. So I had to, as a journalist, consider Jazz's motivations for wanting to speak publicly about her father and justify that as well, because I wanted to be cautious that it wasn't just her way to get back at her father because of how he treated her over the years. But I did strongly believe that her motivation was to help Rachelle's case, because I weighed up in my mind, well, what's she going to get out of this? You know, she wasn't using her full identity, and I think that she was going to come under a lot of criticism from her family, and also such a big step for someone to take to publicly accuse your father of murder. But she felt so strongly about it. So I was comfortable. What were your feelings on Jazz's motivation and the public interest of broadcasting and publishing her story?
So you and I were worried about the same thing, or considering the same thing, but for different reasons. You're thinking about, as you just sort of said there, about the journalistic side of things. You know, I don't want to be used effectively or give her the opportunity to vent and have a go when it might not be true. That's good journalism, to be thinking about those things. I'm thinking, but for a different reason, of the same thing. And what I'm thinking about is, how's this going to look on the witness stand if she's got to give evidence as part of our defence of a defamation case? And is she going to get ripped apart by a smart senior counsel on the other side in cross-examination when they are able to put to her the very things you're talking about? You know, that you just made this up because you were angry about your father because of X, Y, and Z. So we're both thinking about the same things. Motive is really important. And one of the things that I factored in, I'm not sure you and I ever actually talked about this part of it, Ash, but it wasn't like you started the podcast and Jazz came running out of the shadows and said, hey, I'd like to tell my story. You had to build trust with her over a significant length of time, and slowly, I think, as she probably, the empathy for the victim's family, I think that drove her slowly to change from a position of I don't want to tell my story to I've got to tell my story. Or you can get a bit of an insight into someone's motive depending on how quickly they are to say, yeah, I'll tell my story. If she'd rung you on day one and say, you know, where's your studio? I want to come in and tell my story, we might have been a little bit more suspicious than we were. As things unfolded, you having to build the trust and draw out of her and convince her that it was the right thing to do for her to tell her story. So what really did she get to gain? Did she have to gain from this other than quite a lot of heartache, frankly? So, yeah, look, I think we're both thinking about the same thing and came to the same conclusion, but probably for different reasons. You're thinking about the journalism of it, and I'm thinking about how it's going to look in court.
Let's talk now about someone else who was brave enough to speak on the record and you had to analyse her comments, was Kevin Correll's ex-wife, who we referred to as Elise in the podcast. Another front page, also another episode that was dedicated to her memories of being married to Kevin. What were some of the things you were conscious of when you were analysing those comments and what you were comfortable in publishing?
Exactly the same point. As a general rule, testimony or evidence or information from the ex-partner, male or female, you've got to start from a position of questioning it and suspicion, if you like, about the motivation. So in exactly the same way as I just described Jazz's position and how we were analysing her motivation, we did the same thing for Kevin's ex. Ultimately, we're pretty careful about how we did that and how we treated that. All the same considerations were at play, frankly.
And I'll just say as well, it is a fast-moving investigation. So you can't predict who's going to come forward and what was going to happen next. So that's why there wasn't a lot of notice sometimes that we did have to change. And one of the things that came in extremely late, and I know my producer to my left here, Rhys Gunter, he was across the publication of the very first response we got from Kevin Correll, which came in response to an email I sent him about the allegations levelled against him by Elise, his ex-wife. What did you make of that response? Because he made some very strong denials, denied every allegation that I put to him in relation to his ex-wife. Interestingly, he didn't deny murdering or hurting Rachelle.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to the thing about defamation being an emotional cause of action, an emotional tort. And pretty much the only time we heard from him with any substance was on that occasion, where he's responding to his ex-wife. And I think that just speaks to the emotion of it and how it sort of really hit a nerve for him. So yeah, I mean, I thought that was interesting, and people don't necessarily have a great deal of insight into what they're doing and saying, and how what they're doing and saying will be perceived by others when they are emotional. And we think about it ourselves. When you're having an argument with your partner or your friend or whatever, and you're emotional, you're not necessarily thinking about what you're saying and how it's coming across. And I thought it was really fascinating that at that time of high emotion when he's responding, that he didn't do what I know I would do in the calm light of day if someone accused me of murder, and that is say, hey, by the way, before I deal with these allegations from my ex-wife, I just want to say I am innocent of this crime that you are linking me to. Now, the fact that he probably didn't even think about it because he was so emotional about the wife, but I do think it gives a bit of an insight into his mindset. Now, how much stock you can put in it is up for debate, but I do think it's an interesting little observation about his response at that time of high stress and high emotion for him.
And this was Kevin Correll's response to 4 questions we put to him following our interview with his ex-wife. Your fair and balanced inquiry. From the sensationalised headlines to your fresh allegations, nothing has been fair and balanced during this investigation. Over the past 23 years, I've been interviewed by detectives numerous times. I've attended the inquest and cooperated with police, supplying my DNA and answering all their questions. The new allegations from my ex-wife should help your podcast ratings and sell your newspaper, so I will answer your 4 questions. I vehemently deny these allegations, and the answer is no to all 4 questions. Sincerely, Kevin Correll.
And it's important to note the 4 questions did not include, did you murder Rachelle? So his vehement denial is not to murdering Rachelle. And one of the things you do when you're in court and someone's giving evidence, you really watch for exactly what they're saying. Generally speaking, people don't lie. They often try and sidestep the core allegation. If we're talking about murder in this case, people will often not say, I didn't murder the person. If they did, I didn't murder the person. They'll attack other things. It wasn't fair and balanced is what he's saying. Your reporting was sensationalist. Well, yeah, maybe it was sensationalist. A sensational allegation was being made. That doesn't address whether or not, that's not a denial to murder. And I think it's fascinating that you have him doing exactly what it is said that witnesses who are trying to not lie, because it's hard for people to just actually lie about something black and white. So what they usually try and do is avoid the question and pick up something else. And that's what he's done here. He's done the absolute classic case of picking on something that he really believes. He would have believed it was sensationalist. He would have believed that it wasn't overly fair. That doesn't mean that it's not true that he murdered her. So I find it fascinating that he did the classic thing of not denying the black and white allegation, did he murder, and actually picking up and denying and having a go about all these other peripheral matters.
I also sought your advice before we approached Kevin Correll, before he even knew that we were investigating him. Were you nervous about that?
Was I nervous about it? No, not at all. In fact, the opposite. I mean, one of the things that is specifically required under that public interest journalism defence that I was talking about earlier is that you give the opportunity to the person you might be making allegations against to respond. And so I'm thinking about it from a legal sense, and am I ticking boxes in the Defamation Act? You're thinking about it from a journalist perspective. Of course you should put the allegations to the person. So no, rather than being nervous about it, I was heartened by the fact that we were doing it. I felt like it was, if anything, it was going to lessen our risk. And of course, if Kevin had been able to say, and this is perhaps a silly example, but if he was able to say, look, it couldn't have been me because here, look at my passport, I was overseas, or something like that. If he was able to give us something that allowed us to go, oh, actually, turns out we were on the wrong track here. This guy clearly didn't do it. Then that's something we need to know. We need to know that, and we would have published it and probably changed tax quite significantly. So was I nervous? No. I was very comfortable, and in fact I wanted to. And if in the highly unlikely event you were saying I don't want to go to him, we would have been having an argument about that, because I would have been saying, no, I want you to go to him. Now, of course, you were always wanting to go to him. That's good journalism. But, yeah, so no, I wasn't nervous at all about that.
That's good. Can't say the same for myself, just because you can never predict someone's reaction. And I'll never forget that day because of his face and what I saw. I saw this moment, this shift that was, it was almost like he knew this day was coming. He knew this had chased him for a long time and he'd been avoiding it. And he knew that at some stage later in his life, after all those years after an inquest, that he would get hit up by a journalist and a film crew.
Yeah, I remember wherever I was at the football or something like that, and I was like, not nervous about it, but I was like, I cannot wait to hear what happens here, because we are going to get arguably the best insight into, whether or not he did this from your doorstop with him. So I was really fascinated to see, was he going to stare down the barrel of the camera and say, I did not do this? And were you going to come away and say, do you know what? I don't know. I think I believe him, or was he going to make some slip up and make some admission? Like, there were all these sort of scenarios that could have really shaped our risk assessment and where we're going with the podcast. So I was not nervous, but I was I was on edge in a I'm fascinated sort of way about what was going to happen.
Kevin Correll, I'm Ashlea Hansen. I'm a journalist from News Corp. I'm investigating the murder of Rachelle Childs. Did you kill Rachelle Childs?
Get out of here, will you?
He turns around quickly and heads back to his Pajero.
Did you lure Rachelle to her death with the promise of a walk-on-shore?
I've been through plenty of...
Kevin gives me a little nudge with his elbow to get the microphone out of his face.
Why did you change your name, Kevin? Why did you change your name?
Get out of the way, get out of the way.
Watch out, Dan. Whoa!
He gave you nothing in that doorstop on the Friday. I think on the Monday, or maybe it was the Tuesday, we sent him all the questions that you were hoping to put to him in person. We sent him those via email. And we did that for the two reasons that we talked about, the same reason we went and did the doorstop, for the journalistic reason of you wanting to give him a genuine opportunity, and jumping someone, perhaps, maybe he doesn't have the calmness to respond, so we'll give it to him in email. We'll be fair with him. So you wanted to do that from a journalistic perspective, and I wanted to do it because that's required by the Act to give a reasonable opportunity to respond. So that didn't get us anything from him that made us feel like we were on the wrong track.
There was a moment there that I thought, he is going to stop, he is going to talk. And then he didn't, and he walked back and gave me a little nudge, but he looked furious.
Did you have security with you?
We did. We had a security guard with us.
How far off was he?
He was pretty close to me, and he knows that there were genuine concerns about risk in terms of his reaction, because so many people had told me that he's a violent man, he's a dangerous man, and he was a suspect in a murder. So I didn't think I would be well received. So it was only responsible that, I made sure I'm not a cowboy. So I was taking someone with us to make sure that, not just for me, to keep me safe as well, but to keep my colleagues safe, because I was there with a cameraman and a photographer, and I needed to keep them safe as well. What was your reaction when you found out he died in Thailand?
My first thought was it suicide? And then the next thought was that I felt for the Rachelle's family, because I think they probably felt like that this could have been this podcast and this series could have helped them find out exactly what happened in the night in question, and it's probable now that that's going to go to the grave with Kevin. And I felt for them that maybe they weren't going to get the resolution that they wanted. Maybe for him being charged potentially.
Do you think Jazz could be put on the stand, and could her evidence be admissible? Perhaps not a criminal proceeding, but do you think her evidence is pertinent to a coronial inquest if it did happen to resume?
What's arguably not admissible would be her view of whether her father did this or not. What is admissible, and I think pretty damn important, is that evidence we talked about the story about the bikies cutting off Rachelle's finger. And the fact that if Jazz can give evidence to say, he told me that, and yet here he is later denying that he ever said that. Is it a smoking gun? No, but does it, together with something like the phone data, does it start to build a case? Yes. And so I absolutely think that Jazz's evidence would be and should be looked at by a coroner if there is to be another inquest.
I know that you don't have a crystal ball, but what do you think could possibly happen now for Rachelle's case from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, look, a coroner's inquest is probably, it's a real possibility. I'd love to think that there's a coroner's inquest. There's a family out there still wanting justice. Now, if Kevin did this, the justice that the family can get is a finding that Kevin Correll murdered Rachelle. They can't get Kevin Correll anymore in jail. That being the case, I would have thought a coroner's inquest is the appropriate course. I hope that occurs.
Thanks for your time, Justin.
Cheers, Ash.
If you have any information you want to share with me, Ashlea Hansen, you can do so confidentially. Please send an email to dearrachelle@news.com.au. Remember, eligible News Corp Australia digital subscribers get early access to breaking news and developments on Rachelle's case. To subscribe and learn more, go to dearrachelle.com.au.